Unit 7. Who? Defining clause. The boy is a student. The boy is my neighbor. We don't know the boy. Who is the boy? We don't know his name. How old is he? Where does he live? So we need the defining clause to explain about the boy. The defining clause here is who or that is a student. So there are many boys in the area. So if there's a defining clause that mention or explain who the boy's status is, namely as a student, now we start to know who the boy is. So this clause is really defining or explaining about the existence of the boy. The boy who or that is a student is my neighbor. So this is a defining clause. Then how about Tom is a student? Tom is my neighbor. Tom. By hearing the name Tom, we know who the boy is already. So we don't need the clause anymore. So automatically the noun or automatically the clause who is a student become non-defining, non-explaining, non-describing. That's why we call it non-defining clause. So Tom is my neighbor is more than enough. Who is the student? This is a true wordy. We don't need this clause. It doesn't explain anything. Tom is more than enough to explain everything. Okay? So the boy who or that is a student is a defining clause. The Tom who is a student is non-defining clause. We don't need this clause to explain anything. Tom is more than enough. Defining clause and non-defining clause which is used to modify or explain about the thing. Meanwhile, the defining clause and non-defining clause who are used to explain about the subject or the persons. Now, talking about defining which. The bag was big. I bought the bag. The bag, which bag? So many bag with many brand mark. We don't know which one. So, which that I bought is a defining clause because it really explains what bag is, which bag, what color of the bag. Non-defining clause which. Chanel bag was big. I bought Chanel bag. By mentioning the famous brand mark Chanel, we know which bag already. So Chanel bag which I bought was big. The Chanel bag doesn't need the defining clause like which I bought anymore. By mentioning the Chanel brand mark, we know what it is. It is between the backpack or big bag or small bag or handbag. We don't need the defining clause which I bought anymore. It is different with the bag. Which bag? So many bags with the many brand mark in the world. So we need the defining clause which bag or the bag which or that I bought. This kind of clause is really explain. This kind of clause really explain everything. So that's why we call it defining clause for the bag, and the clause for the Chanel bag non-defining clause. If we mention the name, we don't need the defining clause anymore. But if there's no name like the bag only, we really need the defining clause. Now, slide 3. Defining and non-defining clause where. The first one, the school is famous. I study at the school. The school, many school. Which school? We don't have any name, so we need the defining clause. Where or that I study at is famous. So the where or that I study is really defining clause because it defines the school, describes the school, explain the school in a very complete way. Then I study at Bodhicitta is a famous school. I study at Bodhicitta. By mentioning Bodhicitta, we know what it is already. It is a famous school, so we don't need the defining clause where or that I study anymore. So that's why for the school, the defining clause where or that I study is really very important for the school. That's why we don't use comma. Meanwhile, for Bodhicitta, by mentioning the Bodhicitta name, we know what it is already. It's a famous school. We don't need to explain or give a further explanation of the further clause or defining clause by saying where or that I study. That's why we put a comma here. If the clause is not important, undefining, we need the comma. like Bodhicitta, comma, where I study. This is an unimportant clause or non-defining clause. That's why we put comma. But the school where or that I study, this clause is very defining and very important. That's why we don't put comma here. More examples about the defining and non-defining clause which use the relative pronoun who, which, and where. Number 1, the girl who or there is a director is my neighbor. This is a defining clause because it really helps and give us the complete information about the girl. Jane, who is a director, is my neighbor. Who is a director? This is a non-defining clause. We don't need it. That's why we put comma. The animal which that I call is yellow. This is important because there are so many animals here. We don't know which one without the defining clause which that I call. The cat, we know which animal already, so we don't need the defining clause anymore or which that I call. That's why we put comma. The hotel where that I stay, many hotels, that's why we need the defining clause. That's why we don't put comma. Hilton Hotel, this is very clear already, so we don't need the defining clause anymore. Where I stay, that's why we put comma.